Today's tutorial deals with the research design and hypothesis. First of all, you already have your hypothesis. We started with that early, but here you need to state it in your paper. So as you're writing your paper, you can add things as we go, and here you just need to clearly state your hypothesis. So label it, and then, for example, this could be my entire hypothesis. This study examines student social media use outside of school. My hypothesis is that student social media use outside the school day leads to lower academic performance and more frequent absences. Now, if you look at this, you notice that I have two variables that I'm looking at in comparison with social media use. I could have written that in two essentially separate hypotheses, or in mine I included it into one, so I'll have to address both of those. But what you see here in blue could be my entire section of my hypothesis. You already have it done, so now it's just putting it in your paper. Now what you don't have done is your research design. So that you have to do first, and then you can include it in the paper. So you can create the research design and then include at least much of it. You can't do all of it at this point, but we can get part of it done. So what a research design, or sometimes referred to as methodology, is it states the procedure that the research used or followed during collecting data and analyzing that data. So it'll include things like where did you get your data from? Was it a survey? Was it, was it collected from somebody else? In our cases, it's probably going to be a survey. Where will the sample come from? And specifics about the sample, and I'll explain that in a minute. Where and when will that data be? Was that data collected, or how was it collected? Okay, those are things to consider here. So when you're doing your research design, some things that you can work on now, some of the things that you have to accomplish right away. Number one, define your terms. You have to make sure that the reader knows what you're talking about, that they're thinking the same thing as you. So, for example, if you are using the term extracurricular, let's say you're examining extracurricular activities in correlation with attendance. Well, what is an extracurricular activity? You can't just assume that people know, plus you have to define it. So are you talking about extracurricular activities being sports? Or are you including in extracurricular activities things like band? Are you including things like clubs, such as art club or whatever? I don't care what you include in there, but it needs to be clear to the reader what is an extracurricular activity. It also needs to be clear in your data collection, because if you are defining extracurricular activity as only a sport, and someone who is taking the survey thinks that, let's say, business club is extracurricular activity, they may be giving you answers that you're not looking for. So make sure it's defined clearly. Or maybe what is a video game? Now this may seem kind of simple, but if you're looking at video game usage in correlation with grades, what are you including? Are you including only game console systems like an Xbox or a PlayStation, or are you talking phone-held games like a Candy Crush? If you're doing something with violent video games, what is a violent video game? How would you define it? Would it be a game that any violence at all is used, which in case like a Madden football game may be considered violent, or is that not what you have in mind? So it's just make sure those things are defined. Same thing with social media. If my hypothesis, I said social media use, well, I need to be able to define what social media is. Am I using Twitter and Snapchat and Facebook, or what else is out there? You guys know what you're being used, but you got to include that. Plus, the reader of this study might be looking at it 4, 5, 6 years from now when there may be new things out there that were not included in this study, or some of these may have become obsolete. Plus, you need to make sure that the person who is taking the survey understands what you're asking for. So, if you might need to include in the survey, if I'm doing social media, I may say, how much social media do you use a night? Social media is defined as Twitter, Snapchat, and Facebook, or so they know what you are talking about. So they give you accurate answers. Maybe they think social media is something different. Maybe they include social media as video gaming and talking to friends on video games, which you could include, but if you're going to include it, it needs to be part of your definition. So you need to define terms, which is very, very important, because you have to know what you're talking about, and so do the people who are being surveyed, and so do the people who are reading your finished paper. How was the data collected? Well, here you're going to have to determine how are you going to collect data. We're probably going to do a survey for ours. In fact, most of you will do a survey, if not all of you. Probably going to do it on a Google form, although you just have to explain it was collected through a Google form. But if you did personal surveys, if you talked to people in the Commons, then mention that. How did you collect the data? What were the survey questions? You need to specifically put the survey questions in this part of your paper. Okay, but you need to come up with those. Now, we don't want a lot of questions, so probably 3 to 5 questions total. And you probably want to put ranges. So if you're asking for GPA, you might want to put, does your GPA fall within? And then give ranges, and then give them a multiple choice. It'll be much easier to collect your data that way. So you could put, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, or you might want to go like 2 to 2.5, 2.5 to 3, but or 2.51 to 3. But include your questions. When you're making the survey, you want to probably put a range in there. You might also want to put, if it's a male or a female taking this, don't put people's names, but ask for their gender. May be important, maybe not, but it might be. The gender might be important, age, grade, those kind of things should be included in your survey. And then just a few questions about, how many hours of video games you play a night, approximately. And then give a range, 0 to 1 hour, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, over, however you want to do that. Here's some things that you will need to include eventually. When was the data collected? Now, we haven't collected the data yet, but eventually in your paper you'll put in there, this was collected on, and give a date. Or you could put in February of, or the range of February 27th to March 15th of 2018, or whenever it was. Where was the data collected? It was collected in a school, it was collected in classes, was it collected in teams? Where was it collected? Who was the data collected from? So this is essentially your sample. What was the age range? If you just did freshmen, then your age range is probably 15, 16-year-old. What was the grade range? Was it freshmen through seniors? Was it just seniors? What was it? What was the gender? How many males were there? How many females took this? So again, in your survey, you need to include those questions as kind of the introduction part of it. Not introduction, but the first questions they answer. Male, age, and get the range in there. I'd make it multiple choice, because then they can just quickly check it and you can see the data really quickly. So you're going to have to include those grades or whatever. Some of this can't be completed at this point, right? Like some of this stuff cannot be completed yet because we haven't done it, but you still will need to include it eventually in the paper. So if I were you, I would put a little, if you're writing your paper part of it, I would write something in red like I have here with just a reminder that you need to insert sample information here at another time. So like you already have at least your rough draft done of your introduction. You have your rough draft of your article review. You have your hypothesis. Now you'll have your research design. But again, it won't be complete. You can't complete it at this point. You have to design your research, but then eventually you can complete this. So you can complete part of this. You can include this stuff after you've figured out what your definitions are, and what your survey questions will be. You got to create those first, but then you can include them. But you can include some of this data yet, and then certainly we'll analyze the data later, but that's in a different part of the paper. Okay, so this is what we're going to try to get accomplished next. Design your research and write your hypothesis. And you already have your hypothesis, but designing your research.